Hi folks, my name's Darren and I wanted to kitbash Ulrik the Slayer. The revamped Ulrik the Slayer model came out in 2016, a mere 7 years ago. When I say it like that, it's actually quite a while ago, isn't it? However much it's such a cool model, I really wanted to do an updated Primaris version of it. And with some of the more recent released kits, I thought it would be a good opportunity to update this model. You'll be pleased to know that I actually only used two proper kits anyway. I used 3 technically if you count the backpack. For the base of this Kitbash, we're going to be using the Primaris CHAPLAIN from the Indomitus box set. I removed all the key components from the sprue. You don't really need the backpack for this, as we're going to use a different one later on. I then removed the cloak of Ulrik the Slayer from the sprue, removed any excess tabs and cleaned up any mould lines. This would be a good point to thank everyone so far for watching the video and for watching the previous video. I had some amazing and positive feedback, so I really appreciate that. If you're new here and you do like what you see, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button, maybe chuck in a like and a comment down below. Next up, using my hobby saw, I carefully removed the arm holding the Absolver bolt pistol, as I was going to be replacing this with the arm that Ulrik has holding his helmet later. That sounded wrong, but you know what I mean. At this point, I continuously made sure to check the chest piece against the back piece, as I knew there was going to be a lot of work to actually whittle it down to make it fit, as the back part is actually smaller in scale ever so slightly. I then lopped his head off as I didn't really need it. I was going to be using Ulrik's head. I then stuck the chest piece onto the peg that was left over after I removed the head, using my sprue goo concoction. I like to use my normal plastic glue just to do like small controlled pinpoint placements of glue in areas that will allow connection to be stronger. And also at this point, once again, I wanted to compare what I already had against Ulrik's cloak. Back with the hobby saw, I removed the upper half of the back end of the torso from the remaining leg that I needed. If any of you folks would like to see me kitbash something, or you've got any questions about what I do, please feel free to comment below. Next up, I carefully used my clippers to remove the tome from the waist of the chaplain. I wasn't going to need this, and it would have been way of the cloak when I attached it in the end anyway. During this whole process, as always, I compared the piece against the rest of the model to make sure I wasn't interfering with anything else. I then used my hobby knife just to finally remove some of the smaller bits and smaller areas. Once happy with that, I stuck the leg to the rest of the torso. Full transparency here, it was at this point I started to kind of doubt myself and think that I was actually biting off more than I could chew. The things weren't going together properly, there was gaps. I was like, I'm not happy with this. This is not working. However, I persevered, and with my hobby saw I removed the arm holding the Crozius. Crozius? Crozius? Crozius, isn't it? This is another part where I cry inside, as I realised by removing the torso from the leg, I then had a huge gap where I'd be placing Ulrik's cloak onto the front torso, so I had to cut the smallest slither of the back of the torso to fit into where this huge gap was going to be, and it looked awful. I was, again, not happy. But once again, I continued, prolonging my pain even further. I actually stuck this slither of back torso onto the body and kind of committed. Once again, I compared Ulrik's cloak to how it would fit against the rest of the body and removed excess plastic to ensure that the gap that I did have wasn't as horrific as it initially looked. I actually stopped at this point. I got very annoyed with myself, didn't want to continue, and left it a couple of days before I went back to it. I always feel like it's important to talk about things that weren't successful, and it's very important to make sure that you take that time to step back, because you can go back to it a couple of days later and have a fresh mind and fresh attitude towards it, and hopefully you'll be able to get it done.
3 days later.
So I came back to it. I stuck with it. Yeah, it might have been several days later, but I managed to get it to a point where I was happy. I had also removed the Aquila from the chest and then began the process of comparing the rest of Ulrik's cloak to what I'd already placed down. However, I wanted to get the arms on first before I put the rest of the cloak on. So I removed Ulrik's arm holding his helmet, cleaned up any remaining tabs and smoothed down any mould lines with my hobby knife. Once I was happy with the way it fit, I then glued it in place. After that, I removed the front half of Ulrik's torso and with my hobby knife carefully cut off the arm that would be holding the Crozius. I then stuck the loose arm underneath the shoulder pad. I did use my sprue glue to fill in any kind of glaring obvious gaps. You can use green stuff or millipelt or something like that, but I find this is a lot easier, and after all that I went through, at this point the thought of using green stuff or milliput makes my balls itch. I actually snipped off a small part of the front half of Ulrik's cloak as it wasn't quite stretching around. So as you can see there, I've snipped off the main part of the front of the cloak and stuck that to the model as is. I then attached the other side of the cloak to the other arm. And then glued the necklace and the pendant to the torso separately. Next up is a case of removing the hand holding the Crozius from the sprue, and once again removed any tabs and smoothed out any mould lines. When comparing the hand to the arm, the way the Crozius would sit in conjunction with the new pose would cause the Crozius to tilt backwards, and it didn't quite look right. So what I had to do was shave the hand down a bit so I was able to manipulate it a bit more and stick it in the more natural looking position. Once I was happy with it lining up, I then glued it in place. For the backpack, I had a spare Primaris Space Marine one laying around, and I started by removing the main vents on the sides. I then used my hobby saw to remove the top part of the backpack. The reason behind this is that I wanted to attach the skulls from Ulrik's backpack along with the Space Wolf-esque iron halo, and I didn't really want to snip those bits off, mess them up, so I'd rather just mess up a spare Space Marine backpack. I then clipped Ulrik's backpack from the sprue, removed any tabs, cleaned up any mould lines, and then made some comparisons against the spare Space Marine backpack that I'd just cut up. I had to ensure that this cut was as accurate as I could make it, so I used my hobby saw and cut a bit further down than I needed to. However, this allowed me to adjust. After going backwards and forwards and comparing, once I was happy, I then stuck it in place. And once again, I used my sprue goo to fill in any unsightly gaps. After sticking the backpack together and sticking it onto the model, I was super happy how this was turning out. A stark contrast to how I was feeling before when I just wanted to give up. I then removed Ulrik's head from the sprue, tidied up any loose tabs and smoothed any mould lines out. I also then removed the peg that it would normally have sat into the torso of the old Ulrik model, as it wouldn't quite work in this new torso. It then kind of gave me a makeshift ball joint neck. I then stuck his head in place. I then wanted to add some of the details that were on the model, so the Space Wolf iconography that was on the original Ulrik model. So I removed the wolf fur charm from his belt, and I removed the, I'm going to say it's drinking horn. It's not a drinking horn, it's probably just a horn of some description. I removed that from the old piece so then I could attach it to the new piece. For the base, I used some decorative grit to fill in the gap where the Crozius is being held aloft and where the base is. Currently he's like kind of holding it in the air. So I used this grit to pack in and kind of make like a second tactical rock for his Crozius. He's already standing on one and now he's got another one for his Crozius. And this is the second time in 2 videos where I'm going to be referring to Pete the Wargamer, but I added some differentiation by putting on some dead animal bits in the form of human skulls from the Citadel skull kit. And then to finish the base off, I added some fine sand over some PVA, but I didn't record that because I'm an absolute noob. However, I then also added some texture paint from Citadel, a Grelin Earth, some crackle paint that is, and some Vallejo Earth texture. Once the base had fully dried, I painted the model up, which left me with this. And here he is, Ulrik the Slayer as a Primaris chaplain. I am super happy with how this turned out. I was really worried at one point. How do you think it turned out? Let me know in the comments below. Once again, a huge thank you to everyone who watched the video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy the content I'm producing, please consider throwing a subscription out there, give me a like, sharing it with people who might be interested in it. I'm also really keen to get feedback on my videos, so any constructive criticism about the way they're laid out, or any suggestions as to what you'd like to see, please let me know. Thank you all once again, and I'll catch you in the next one.